Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming together this evening for our curator's talk and tour of collective memory led by Garnet Muething. So this evening we are gathered here on the traditional territories and homeland of the Kwanle-Dun First Nation and the Tonquitchun Council. And on an evening where we're here to talk and celebrate Yukon art, we acknowledge and are so grateful and thankful for the centuries of Yukon art that's been happening on these lands. In particular, the incredible work by Yukon First Nations. Right, and with that, I'm going to hand this over to Garnet Muething, Art Curator for Yukon Government.
Thanks so much, Mary. I'm just going to stop my share for a moment. So I appreciate the introduction, and I wanted to give thanks on behalf of the Department of Tourism and Culture to the Yukon Arts Centre for partnering with us on this exhibition and making this online talk possible tonight. We normally have openings to celebrate exhibitions where we're all able to gather and see the art together and talk about it and have some food and drinks. But because that isn't possible right now, we're finding other ways to experience the art. So I'm really grateful for that. And I'm grateful for all that the Art Center has done in helping us to mount and launch this exhibition. I've been the art curator with the department for over 12 years, and the main part of my job is looking after the Yukon Permanent Art Collection. It's really exciting to be able to share this many works in one place with the public, because it's a really nice opportunity to look at a wholesome piece of the collection to get a better sense of the diversity that we have in it. So tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the collection to give you some of that background context. And then we're going to do a virtual tour through the exhibition and look at the way we created and developed the exhibition, as well as a lot of the individual works of art. And I'm going to talk about as many of those pieces as I can. There are almost 100 works in this exhibition, so I'm not going to be able to talk about each one of them individually, but I'm really going to try to give you a great sense of the diversity that we have in the collection and talk about all different kinds of art tonight. Before we get started, I did want to give a little bit of a warning that in one of the galleries, we're going to be looking at some work with subject matter that could potentially be triggering for people. That includes pieces that deal with loss and grief, as well as experiences of trauma in the residential school system. So before we enter into that space, I'll make sure that people know, and if you want to step away for a few minutes, then you'll be able to do that. So to give a little bit of a background on the Yukon Permanent Art Collection, 2021 marked 40 years that the collection has been in existence. And it really came about through the vision of a group of Yukoners who could see the amazing work being created here and the way that the Yukon inspires and drives a really unique artistic practice. And they wanted to find a way to gather all of that work to keep it as a permanent record that we could look back on to tell us about our history and to see the amazing developments and the evolution of the arts community, and also to hold it in trust for the future so that it could be a place where we gather that knowledge and keep it for people to enjoy. They formed a society and they called it the Friends of the Gallery. That reflected the old Whitehorse Public Library Gallery that was downtown at the time. And they've now changed their names to the Friends of Yukon Permanent Art Collection. For starting, they did a lot of fundraising and funding applications to buy the first individual works for the collection. And over the years, that evolved into a relationship with the government of Yukon, who provides annual funds so that we can purchase new work to add to the collection every year. And they also created my program, which takes care of and shares the Yukon Permanent Art Collection. But that relationship with the Friends has always been maintained, and it's the board of the Friends that selects the new work. So it's people from the community choosing the work that's going to come into the collection that represents the Yukon and is held in trust for Yukoners. So after 40 years, we have more than 500 works in the collection. It's a momentous time to celebrate, and I think a really great time to sort of look back at what we have and to think about what that's going to look like in the future. The diversity in the collection is quite incredible, and it really reflects what's happening in the community here. So we have everything from drawings, paintings, photographs. We've got carvings, stunning beadwork from all around the territory, sewing, textiles, ceramics, sculpture, all the way to installations and photographic documentation of performance pieces. So it really runs through a huge range of artistic practice and really represents how much the North and the Yukon is inspiring to artists and inspires them to create all kinds of different work. We show the collection across the territory. So we have a program that we call the rotation, where we take it around to different public buildings and put it in public spaces so that people and Yukoners and visitors are encountering the work during their everyday lives. So that's a way for us to always be sharing the collection. And we've got about a third of the collection on display at all times. The other way that we share the collection is every year we have an exhibition that showcases the newest acquisitions to the collection. It's a nice time to celebrate and congratulate all of the artists whose works are being added. And we try to move that around to different spaces so that we're engaging with different audiences and installing the work into new venues. And then every few years, we have a really nice opportunity like this, where we have a space that's large enough to show a huge portion of curated work from the collection. And as the years go by, the way that we can curate the depth of those possibilities just gets bigger and bigger. And we can really explore some ideas and go back into the layers of the collection and see the connections that are forming between the works. Exhibitions like this really help us understand the scope and the value of what's being held in the collection and the way that that represents and reflects the experience of living in the North. I think that there's nothing that really mirrors our society and our culture and our history quite in the same way that art does, and gives us the ability to reflect back on that. I may be slightly biased in that, but I think most people here in the audience tonight will agree with me that it's a completely unique way for us to see these things. So with gathering such a huge portion of the collection, it really gives us a chance to spend time with the work and experience the richness of all the materials and the visuals and the narratives that we have in the collection. And I think that the other thing that's great about having an exhibition of this size is that we have the space for people to take time and really engage with the work and become lost in it. And I think that that kind of escape is especially important right now. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I developed the theme of collective memory and why we decided on this as the theme of the show. So the development of the 40th anniversary exhibition had been happening for some time because we obviously wanted to take a moment to celebrate after 4 decades of collecting. And I was finding it challenging to think of a theme that would really represent all of the diversity in the collection. And during the time when I was considering that, I attended an online symposium by the Ontario Museums Association on Indigenous collections. And I saw a presentation where an Anishinaabe artist named Renee Dillard was talking about her research into historic weaving practices in museum collections. And she was describing how she interacted with the pieces. And she said, I have to remember with my hands. And it really made me think about the way, just helping one person join here. There we go. It really made me think about the way that memory drives artistic creation and artistic practice, but also about the potential for memory to live in a work beyond the process of creation, and the way that all of the experience and knowledge and techniques that an artist puts into the work are then living within that piece for other people to access. And the way that when all of those works come together in a place like a permanent art collection, it forms this vast collective memory that then acts as a resource for us. So her words really stayed with me, and I decided that this was the theme that I wanted to explore within this exhibition. So looking through the collection, I gathered work that I felt connected to and reflected to the theme of memory. And I also paid really close attention to the relationships between works and sort of sub-themes that I felt we could explore within the exhibition. Obviously, I wanted to make sure that we were showing the diversity in the collection and to show work from around the Yukon. And I wanted to select works that I felt were pivotal, both to the artists and to the collection, so that we could see significant turning points either in their artistic trajectories, that's a hard word to say, or in the development of the collection. And so that was what drove the first selection of the pieces. We've also incorporated the 21 newest acquisitions to the collection. And so if you joined us early on, I was playing a slideshow, which we'll play again at the end. And those were the pieces that have joined the collection most recently that we've also placed within this exhibition. So the real fun started when we brought all of the work into the gallery and started to install it, because that was where all of these other relationships and themes and conversations started to emerge within the pieces. And so when I had my team in the space and we were deciding on how to develop the different rooms and where the pieces would go, I really tried to let that guide the way that we installed the work and the placement of it. I didn't really feel like it was going to work to try to do this in a chronological order, because I felt like the viewer would be missing out on all of these connections between family members and artists and community members or people who had talked about similar themes. So I let that really sort of evolve organically. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we move into the space. Okay, so this is the entrance to the exhibition. And to greet you when you walk through the doors, we have this amazing collection of dolls. This project was called De Fil en Histoire, or Stitches in Time. And it's a collection of 14 dolls that were donated to the Yukon Permanent Art Collection by the Association Franco-Yukonaise. This was a community project led by Gerard, where different community members came together, some of whom had artistic experience and some of whom who had never done anything like this. And they all created dolls based on historic Yukon figures. So this lovely collection is going to be such a great piece for engagement and education. And it also builds on the tradition of doll making in the Yukon that we have well documented in the collection. So it's going to be fun to be able to display all of our dolls together, or to take portions of this collection out to communities and show them. You can see all the amazing accessories these dolls have. The details are just wonderful. So when you're ready, Mike, we can move through the doors into the gallery. Great. So I thought it fitting to frame the title wall of the exhibition with the two first pieces that were ever purchased for the Permanent Art Collection. So this is Flying South by Ted Harrison from 1981. Ted Harrison, obviously no stranger to people in the Yukon, probably a lot of art lovers across Canada. His style is so unmistakable. I thought that this joyous landscape was a really great welcome into the exhibition. And Ted was someone who, apart from being a mentor and teacher to so many artists, was a huge supporter and proponent of the formation of this collection. So we have a number of his works in the collection, and we're so lucky to have them. And I think it's fitting that the collection started with this, as well as the other piece that we're going to look at in just a second. Oh, thanks for those details, Mike. That's lovely. So on the other side of the title wall, we have a sculpture by Lilias Farley called Woman. There we go. So this is a sculpture that Lilias created in 1960. And Lilias moved to the Yukon from British Columbia, where she'd had an established art practice, and she came here and was a teacher. And so she brought a different influence and a modernist style with her that she incorporated into her sculpture and her murals that I think had a really big impact on the arts community here. Great. Okay, from here, if we could turn back to the right. I have two other pieces in the front entrance to the gallery. So this is Spring Snow to Fall Snow 2003 by Nicole Bauberger. And I wanted to start with another landscape piece from a different approach. Nicole spent time observing and forming a relationship with this mountain in northern Yukon, and painted it from the spring season all the way to the first snowfall in the fall. And Nicole's work is about time spent outdoors in the environment. You can really see it in the way that she's shown the sky and the atmospheric look of the clouds and the way that the weather is affecting that mountainscape. And I often think of this piece as sort of half landscape and half portrait because of the close relationship that Nicole obviously formed with this mountain. On the other side of the entrance space, turning, great. Thank you. This is a piece by Joseph Tisiga, and Joseph is the recent recipient of the inaugural Yukon Prize for Visual Art. So we're very happy to have 2 works by Joseph in the collection. This is called Obscured Provenance. And I wanted to put another sort of play on landscape out into the entrance of the exhibition. So Joseph has used the landscape as a backdrop for these different ideas that he's exploring surrounding provenance, and setting these kind of symbols of art history and other types of provenance alongside industrial activities. So he's questioning land authority and value, and has some really, really interesting imagery and beautiful textures coming out in this piece. Great. So when you're ready, Mike, we can move into the first room. Thank you. So as I said, when we brought the work into the galleries and started to get a sense of how it all felt together, these other themes emerge within my larger theme of collective memory. And the 2 ideas that I wanted to explore with the work in this room were generational connections and the landscape. So first I'll talk about the array of landscapes that we have in the collection. It makes so much sense that we have so much work that is in response to landscape or landscape based, because the landscape has such a huge and overpowering presence here. It's what draws a lot of people to the Yukon. It's the thing that people imagine when they think about the Yukon, even if they haven't been here. And the way that artists respond to that can sometimes be very similar and sometimes be quite different. I wanted to look to the right, Mike, at our first piece by Emma Barr. I'll clarify, this is the second work by Emma in the collection, but the first landscape that we have in this room that we'll go through. So this is one of our new acquisitions by Emma. It's called Hopeful Horizon. And this is a painting of Book Mountain near Carcross, which is a really sacred and special place to the Carcross-Tagish First Nation, and a mountain that really struck Emma as an artist that she's painted over and over again. And Emma is an extremely well-established landscape painter. She has a very signature style, but she's still doing a lot of exploration within that style. And so you can see in this, she's really playing with a powerful color palette, which is a departure from the palette that she's been working in. And what's interesting with landscape is that I think a lot of us are drawn to landscape because we're drawn to the same spaces, and the artist is able to create these really impactful scenes. Once we actually start experiencing the work, we're able to explore meanings within the layers of that piece. So for Emma, I think that this transition in palette reflected transitions that were also happening in her life. And the result is a painting that's a really special and important piece for her. So I'm glad that we're able to add it to the permanent collection. Looking around the room, you'll see landscape depicted in all different kinds of medias and palettes. And what I always find so interesting is that people sometimes go for the most grand expanse of a landscape, and sometimes it's capturing a quiet moment. If we look over to the left wall, this is a piece by Janet Moore called Into the Blue. And we're looking as though we're actually approaching the mountaintops from the air, with the mountains emerging from the clouds. Just to the left of Janet's piece, we have a triptych of prints. This is one of our new acquisitions this year by Martha Jane Ritchie. And these pieces are entitled Sky 1, Looking Upwards, Sky 2, Swan's Flight, and Sky 3, Heading South. And in this piece, it feels like we're firmly rooted on the ground and looking up into this expanse of the sky. And I just love the way that Martha has captured this in linocut print. It's difficult to see on the screen, but these are printed on Japanese paper that really gives you a sense of the air and the clouds. And it's almost as though you're following the swans as they migrate through the 3 pieces. And then turning to the left, Mike. Thank you. We have Toe Hill by Neil Graham. This is a piece that Neil created after spending a lot of time down in Haida Gwaii. And I love the contrast of this piece, another perspective that we're looking up into the landscape from. It feels like this cliff is just towering over you, and you can't help but explore the cliff faces to find all of the formations and the faces within it. Love these close-ups. So in my mind, the relationship of the land matched well with the idea of relationships between people intergenerationally and through friendships and mentorships. So if we can turn to some of the display cases in the middle of the room, Mike, the one right behind you. Yes. So if we come around to the other side of this case, we have artwork by 3 members of the same family. In the center, a sculpture by Elder Kitty Smith, who was such an important elder in the Kwanlin Dun First Nation, an amazing storyteller, keeper of so much knowledge, and with her husband, Chief Billy Smith, created these sculptures, a lot of which were sold to tourists traveling the Alaska Highway, and then have been found at various estate sales and antique stores and brought back into the Yukon through family members and collectors. So we're very grateful to have that. On the right, we have 2 dolls by one of her daughters, Annie Smith. Annie was an incredible mentor and taught so many people the skills of sewing and beading in this community. And then on the other side of Kitty Smith's sculpture, we have mucklucks by Annie's granddaughter, Karen Dean. These are another of the new acquisitions for this year. And what I love about showing these generational pieces by the same family is that you can really see how Karen is using the traditional skills and the techniques that have been passed down in her family, but is just going wild with her imagination and her use of color. I think Electric Mucklucks is a very suiting title for these pieces. They just glow. They're absolutely beautiful. On the other side of this showcase, we're going to show you some absolutely stunning artwork from Old Crow. So in the center, we have a beaded baby belt by Fanny Charlie. Fanny was such a revered beader and an elder from Old Crow and taught so many people. Although I understand from a lot of people that she taught that they were then scared to show her their work afterwards because she was so set on perfection, as you can tell from her work. That's definitely a characteristic and a signature of Old Crow beading. And then to the left of that, we have a new pair of slippers that were added to the collection this year by Marla Charlie. And Marla's late husband, Douglas, was Fanny's grandson. These are called Alaska style dancing slippers. On the far end, the pair of mitts. These are by Joanne Najuli. And Joanne was a revered beader in Old Crow, created a lot of work in the 1970s. These came into the collection through a private collector who donated them. And we were able to identify Joanne as the artist with the help of the Najuli family. So we're very grateful for that. I've never seen beadwork like this. We're so happy to be able to have it in the collection. And on the wall, the far wall from this piece, we have a piece by Joanne's grandchild, the print in the center of the wall to your left, Mike. We'll get there. There, thank you. This is by Janine Frey-Najutli. And this is a really contemporary piece. Janine does performance and print. And so there's elements of traditional tools and clothing from Old Crow, as well as a lot of really contemporary design influence that Janine's brought into it. So I really wanted to have the relationship of grandchild and grandmother shown in this gallery too. So if you can turn back to the mannequin, Mike. I'm sending him all through the gallery, that one. The one that you were at before, if you could turn back. I apologize if I'm giving anyone motion sickness. Yes. So I wanted to talk about this piece because it's influenced by Old Crow. So this is by Randy Nelson. It's called Winter Solstice Stole, another of the new additions to the collection this year. And Randy created it after spending some time in Old Crow for work during the winter solstice. So one of our most northern communities, the darkest time of the year. And Randy really combined her Métis influences and some of her contemporary beading practices to create this absolutely beautiful garment that just looks like the sparkling night sky in the middle of the solstice in winter. Thank you. So looking a little bit further into friendships and mentorships and relationships, this is a Raven's Tail robe by Anne Smith, who is an elder and an amazing Raven's Tail weaver. So for those who aren't familiar with Raven's Tail, it's an older style of weaving that predated Chilkat and pretty rare for people to be practicing it these days. It was almost lost and revived by a group of dedicated weavers. It's incredibly labor intensive, and creating this type of robe can take well over a year for even the most experienced weaver. So we're really honored and fortunate to have a full Raven's Tail robe in the collection and to be able to share it with people. We've also had this robe danced on several occasions by Anne and by members of her family. Nearby in another mannequin, here we go, thank you. We have another robe and another example of weaving by Heather Callahan. This is called Sea to Mountain Trade Route Travelers Robe and Woven Hat. And Heather took a lot of the influences of the weaving community here and took them with her on a residency where she went to Hawaii and learned weaving practices from the people there. So this piece is her combining those practices and even some of the plants that she incorporated in when she was in Hawaii to create this absolutely beautiful robe. And then in the display case that we can see behind, we have works by Brian Walker. This is the copper vessel. So Brian is Anne Smith's husband, and they often collaborate on pieces that include weaving as well as copper elements. Brian and Anne are huge supporters of the arts community and people who have been collaborating through mentorships and friendships with other artists for a very long time. So this piece, Journey by Brian, references the history of travel on water in the Yukon, echoing the form of a boat or a canoe. And alongside it, I placed Mark Porter's piece, Bear Mother Pole. Mark sadly passed away early in his career and was a well-known carver from Teslin. He and Brian had a very close friendship and collaborated on many pieces, and he's someone that a lot of carvers look to now for inspiration in their work. Behind you can see a piece by Keith Wolf-Smarch. Keith is the lead carver of the Carcross-Tagish First Nation and has created a lot of the totem poles and house posts in that community. And he also is a friend of Brian, was a contemporary of Mark Porter, and the three of them have had a lot of exchange over the years. And so I wanted to show this relationship in that display case. Behind this display on the wall, we have a piece by Calvin Moorberg. Calvin is someone in the next generation of carvers. He's well-established, a teacher and a mentor to many. And right now he's doing a mentorship with Brian Walker where he's incorporating and learning copper. So he'll be incorporating that into his practice, and we're really excited to see where he goes with that.
Just going to throw out there, Calvin has an upcoming solo show at the Yukon Arts Centre. So we're very excited to see more of his work too.
When is that show, Mary?
It is the very next one. So opening March 12th.
Okay. So this display case, we have the purse on the far side. This is another of our new acquisitions for this year. This is by Lena Moen, who is an elder artist from Johnson's Crossing. south of Whitehorse, between Whitehorse and Teslin. Lena has been beading and sewing for as long as she can remember, nearly her whole life, learned her practices from her grandmother, and still tans all of her own hide, which is, if people know much about hide tanning, they know how much work is involved in that. So Lena is just absolutely amazing. She uses a lot of the traditional designs and techniques that she learned from her grandmother and incorporates all kinds of innovative styles to them. So this purse is a new design that she wanted to just explore and see where she could go with it. On the opposite side of the case, we have a piece by Justine Sonoa Wood, which incorporates carving as well as beadwork. There we go. Another new acquisition for this year. So Justine has learned carving and sewing and beadwork from various mentors, but she's really taking those art forms and going out and innovating to create pieces where she's incorporating them with her own style. You can see the message "climate change is real" on the bottom of this piece. So there's also a strong message that she's sending with it. And in the headband at the top, Justine has actually incorporated all kinds of recycled materials. So there's plastic bags, there's CDs, there's an old pair of jeans. She even incorporated cigarettes in there somehow. So if you get to visit it in the gallery, you can take a close look and see if you can tell. But just an absolutely incredibly beautiful piece, and a really interesting way that she's incorporated these pieces of waste to really bring her message to the forefront. On either side between Lena Moon's work and Justine Sonoa Wood's, I wanted to include two more pairs of slippers by elder artists. So Justine is from the Nacho-Nyack-Dun First Nation, and these two slippers are by Alice Bike on this side and Martha Bike on the far side. So showing the relationship and the honoring of the elders from her community. Okay, so when you're ready, Mike, we can move into the next room. Thank you. So this is the room that's going to have some work with content related to trauma and residential schools and loss. So if anybody would like to take a moment away, we'll probably spend about 5 or 10 minutes in this room. So the first piece that welcomes you into the gallery is this float plane that actually hangs from the ceiling and feels like it's descending towards you. This is a piece by Dennis Shorty, and it's called Float Plane LP282. Dennis created this piece with a lot of intuition and working from memory. He was referencing a toy that his father had made him when he was small that he played with, and that he had these joyful memories connected to. But the other side of this piece is that he's also referencing the float planes that came to his community to take children to and from residential school. So this piece was a really significant work for Dennis in resolving and experiencing that part of his history. And I think it's a really powerful piece because of the contrast and the duality of the two joyful and then obviously very traumatic memories that he's referencing in it. When I was developing this room, I saw the connection of a lot of people who were using art practice as a way to pass through experiences of pain and as a form of healing. And I could see a lot of connection thematically between these works. These are two new additions to the collection by Luanne Baker Johnson. And the piece that we can see closest to us is Bricked Self-Portrait, and further away is Bricked Stability. So these are two pieces that Luanne made when she was grieving the recent loss of her 19-year-old daughter after an illness. And building these pieces by form was a long process. If you know about building ceramics by hand, you can see how labor intensive that would have been. When she opened the kiln after firing the first piece that we just looked at, she saw that it had partially collapsed during the firing process. And she felt that she herself was reflected, looking at a self-portrait of something that had partially crumbled but was still standing. So a really powerful reflection of that process of grieving and working through that pain. On the wall behind this piece We have a series of photographs by Doug Smarch Jr. Other side, Mike. There, thank you. So this piece is called Erased, and it was acquired for the collection in 2 stages. The first 4 images we purchased back in 2010, and the work itself was created in 2002. So this piece for Doug talks about his reflection on his own indigeneity and painting himself white as a form of erasure, and thinking about the way that his environment defines and changes the way that he thinks about his own identity and his history and his place in his world now. For Doug, this piece has continually been evolving since he created it, and he often talks about how he didn't fully understand what he was exploring, and then that's still changing for him. So he wanted to add this 5th image to the collection, to this piece that he calls Play Your Flute for Me, Indian, in order to represent and reflect the fact that this is constantly changing, partially due to the fact that the conversation surrounding Indigenous history in Canada and truth and reconciliation is so completely different than it was when he created the piece. So I think it's really important in this collection to be able to represent those changing relationships of the subject matter to the world that we're living in now, and of the significance of the work to the artist, and the fact that that sometimes changes, it's not static. If we move over further to the left, we have a painting by Mary Caesar. Mary is a Casca artist from Watson Lake, and this is a piece called Words and Names They Called Me, that references Mary's experiences and her memory of her time in residential school. Talking about, through her writing and through her presentations and painting these images and bringing them out into the world for people to witness, has been a huge part of Mary's healing journey. And turning to the left again, Mike, the display case with the antler sculpture. This is a work by Upper Tanana artist Teresa Vandermeer Chasse, and it's called Untitled Resilience. This piece that has 2 sides to it, where Teresa has adhered beadwork onto an antler sculpture, reflects the experiences with trauma of 2 women in her family. So each side represents one of the women. And if you can turn around, Mike, to the display case behind you. Thank you. As a reflection on these experiences that people are exploring in their work, I wanted to include work by elder artists as witnesses and as keepers of knowledge, and people who have been so instrumental in sharing the stories of their experiences to make sure that those things aren't forgotten and to make sure that we're building awareness of them. So this is a gun case by Elder Pearl Keenan, who was Tlingit. And in the center of the case, we have a pair of slippers by Annie Henry, who was a Trondikwichin elder from Dawson City. And a beautiful fire bag. Those are wolf paws at the bottom, created by Gertie Tom, who's an elder with the Kwanlindun First Nation. So the other theme that I wanted to explore in this room was connections and relationships with the land, because I saw a lot of complexity and duality reflected in those too. At the very far end of the gallery, we have an installation piece by Valerie Celez called Ditch It. This piece was made for an exhibition that celebrated an anniversary for the Alaska Highway. And what's so interesting about it is that it's from the perspective of childhood memory, where ditches along the Alaska Highway were a place for exploration and adventures. And this is a collection of imagined treasures from those outings that the artist has compiled. So it's a contrast to the historical significance that a lot of people associate with the Alaska Highway, and a really playful exploration and consideration of our pasts, the way that we remember things as children versus being adults, and also things that are discarded from our history that could be considered treasures. And then if you can turn to the far wall with the landscapes, Mike. There we go. So this is a landscape by Jane Isacson called Drawn Into Evavik. And it takes us all the way to such a remote mountainscape far in the north of the Yukon that few of us will get to experience. So a contrast to a work about the Alaska Highway, this piece is happening far beyond where roads can go. Jane's practice is rooted in spending time observing a space and trying to extract patterns and forms from it. So that's what you can see happening in the foreground of it. And I thought it was a landscape that really spoke to our interaction with a space and understanding its history. To the left, we have a work by Ramon Joseph Santos, one of the new acquisitions for this year. Ramon is from Dawson, and this painting is called Before the Hunt. And it reflects the moment of preparation before the harvest and the hunt that happens each fall. And what Ramon talked about a lot in this painting is the feeling of conflict and the anticipation and emotion that are all wrapped up in that time for people. And I think he really captured it amazingly in this piece. On the right, we have a photograph by Peter Mather. This one is another interesting reflection of our relationship with the land. So another harvest where a bear is fishing for salmon in the river. This bear actually has a name. He's called the Mayor of Cluckshoe. And the people of Cluckshoe, the nearby community near Haines Junction, have formed a relationship with this bear where he sort of keeps the order and keeps the younger bears who would intrude on the space that people use to fish out of that area. And then he kind of has his own territory too. So this relationship that's formed between people in the land where they're harvesting fish and of this other inhabitant of the land. So when we're ready, Mike, we can move into the final room. Thank you. So in this room, I was thinking about a sense of place and the history here. And gathering these works, I wanted to root the gallery with the 2 button blankets that you can see on the far wall. I felt that it was a good way to ground the space if we're talking about the Yukon as a place. So these wolf and crow button blankets were created by Eileen Moen and Alan Adzurdza. And wolf and crow are the 2 main clans of most of the Yukon First Nations. So it felt fitting that we have a representation of people who have been here for so long. Turning around, we have a new acquisition by Brenda Lee Asp. There we go. Brenda Lee Asp is a fashion designer and artist, creates all kinds of jewelry. She is based in Haines Junction and is someone who has done a lot of fashion design and explores all kinds of different imagery within her work. Brenda went to fashion school and created this piece when she had a vision for incorporating the tail of a killer whale into the coat. And as she tells it, her instructors were quite concerned about the ability to do this with leather. But what I love about this piece is that Brenda didn't feel concerned about that at all, because she grew up in a family of garment makers. Her grandmother and her mother were sewers, and she grew up with people making garments all the time and understood that she could do whatever she wanted to with leather. So she didn't let any of those concerns hold her back and made this absolutely stunning piece. I wanted to bring work into this space that really showed the strong sense that Yukoners have to connection with place and with history. This is a piece called Beyond by Lillian Leponen. And a lot of the works that we have in the collection show historic places and buildings. Sometimes they're places that are no longer here and they're captured in time. Sometimes they're buildings and places that remain, but the way that the artists have depicted them in their materials, in their gesture, and in their perspective tells us all kinds of things about the history and the feel of those places, and really lets you experience them as though you're there. On the far wall in the gallery, we have a work by A.Y. Jackson called Old Store in Dawson on the right. There. And this is on loan from the Langevin family in Dawson. A beautiful example of a work that A.Y. Jackson created. So A.Y. being one of the group of 7, often traveled here to the Yukon to paint. And the family kept correspondence that they had with the artist who had offered them this painting. There's even a canceled check at the bottom where the family tried to pay him for it, but he was offering it to them in thanks. And so he politely declined their payment in another letter. So a really fun story behind the piece, and just a really special piece of art that we get to keep in the collection that has significance in the Yukon and then wider than the Yukon. Beside it, you can see a work by Jim Robb, Glacier Creek Cabin. Jim, obviously a prominent figure here in the community, such a champion of Yukon history and Yukon art, an incredible artist himself, showing this view that he actually drew from a helicopter looking down over a cabin at Glacier Creek. And I thought that it was only fitting that we put a portrait of Jim Robb on this wall nearby, showing him being honored by his close friend Eileen de Repentigny, who is also a well-known artist from Dawson. Another piece in this space that I wanted to talk a little bit about is a piece we acquired this year by Karen Thomas. It's called The Second Floor, and it's a totally different take on a historic place. So this, just moving down that wall a little bit, Mike. There we go. This is called The Second Floor, and it's the upper story of the Westminster Hotel, or the Pit in Dawson. And I thought it was great to contrast these exterior of historic buildings that we have with an interior, and also the way that Karen really played with color and texture and almost makes you feel disoriented as if you're falling into the space. The way that she's played with perspective is so clever and so effective. And I also think that it's a sensation that a lot of people who have spent time in the pit could relate to, which I think is quite great. Another way that history is referenced in this space is through remnants. So this piece that we have in the middle of the gallery by Veronica Verkley is called Landscape with Horse. And Veronica is so gifted at taking all kinds of pieces left over from either industrial activities or pieces of the actual landscape. She's incorporated rocks and wood and somehow combines them seamlessly into these lifelike animals. What's so beautiful about her work is that you can really feel the presence and the spirit of the animal. And then turning back to the far wall, we have another piece made of an assemblage by Scott Price. This is called Legacy, and a different way to use assembled pieces and remnants. Scott has a really intuitive practice where he takes pieces and assembles them into forms that he feels have relationships. The story that emerged from this piece is reflecting the softwood lumber disputes that were happening and the passage of time. So he's got these monitors and times on it, a piece down at the bottom that almost mimics a metronome. And then turning back to the far wall, another way that people have played with repurposing and recycling work. We have Barb Pratt's textile. This is called Autumn, and it's a journey through an autumn landscape through the eyes of the artist. And Barb Pratt just incorporates amazing colors and textures into these rug hookings that she makes. And a lot of the material that she uses is actually recycled fabric that she has collected and painstakingly cut into strips and then re-dyed. So incredibly vibrant. And then if we turn around opposite, this doll by Gerard, who is the artist that led the Affi dolls that we saw at the very beginning of the show. Cecile also is really dedicated to recycling fabrics and materials in her sculptures. And I thought that this doll also was a really great reference to the sense of place in the Yukon. This is honoring her sister Louise, for who it's named after, but I feel like Louise could represent a lot of the women in the North before and who are here now. In this room, we also see a lot of influence from residency. So residency has become a really strong, sorry, just admitting one more person, welcome. It's become something that has brought a lot of artists here, and that a lot of artists who have been established in the Yukon seek out and go to other places to experience. And I think that they carry that strong sense of place from the Yukon there. So this is The Lobster Trap by Joyce Magiski. And Joyce created this piece when she was doing a residency in Gross Moen, actually taking fish nets and using them to print this texture that you can see on the piece, and then incorporating this incredibly intricate and beautiful graphite drawing of a lobster trap. So reflecting the history and the changing times with the fisheries in the community that she was visiting. Moving to the right, we have Glacial Magic by Rosemary Scanlon. And Rosemary has done a lot of residencies both here and in other places. And then on the same wall, this is by Sarah Fuller, who was a visiting artist doing a residency here. And this relates to so many of the other works in this space. So Sarah did an installation where she did large-scale photography on fabric of historic buildings in Dawson, and then brought them back to their original locations that had long since been abandoned and lit them from within in the forest. So this is actually a photo documentation of her photo installation. So a really compelling and beautiful work in itself, but with so many layers of narrative behind it. So that concludes the tour of the exhibition. I wanted to just talk a little bit in closing about the collection and what we're doing with it. I think it's incredibly important to take these moments to witness the work in the collection, to honor the people who had the vision to create it 40 years ago, all of the people who've served on the board of the Friends of the Gallery since that time and helped select and bring new work into the collection. And of course, most importantly, all of the artists who have dedicated so much time and so much passion to their work and who have put their trust in us to take care of their work in the collection. We take that very seriously, and it's a huge honor to be able to do it. I think one of the most beautiful challenges of curating is creating space for people to engage with and enjoy artwork, and to have their own exploration and experience with it, but also to provide enough context and information that you get a sense of some of the memory and the history that is behind those pieces. So I hope that we have been able to do that with this exhibition. And I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. It's really, really great to see so many people out, and I hope that you've been able to experience this work virtually.